All right, so for those of you who are watching as we speak, welcome to the the City Hall Candidate Forum, which is being sponsored by, excuse me, of course, you always forget to turn these things off, which is being sponsored by PVRRG, stands for Palos Verdes Residents for Responsible Government. We're really glad that you could make it here tonight. My name is Michael Teal. I'm going to be the facilitator, the moderator for tonight's event. And we're going to get started with the candidates here in just a few minutes. In the meantime, what I'd like to do is to give you guys who are watching just a little bit of an introduction so you know what to expect. First and foremost, this is a forum. This is not a debate. The candidates will be speaking directly to you. We won't see anything like Tuesday night. But you do have the chance to listen directly to what all of the folks are saying. In terms of the timing, the way we're going to do this is each person will have 2.5 minutes to make an opening statement. Each person will have a minute and 45 seconds to answer questions. And we anticipate approximately 11 questions. We'll just, honestly, we'll see how the time goes. And then everyone will also have a 2.5 minute opportunity to wrap up. All candidates have agreed to a set of basic ground rules, which include, among other things, giving each other the respect and the courtesy that all of them deserve for being willing to put themselves in this kind of a role. My job as the moderator or facilitator is frankly to just keep things moving smoothly and effectively so that everybody who is a candidate for these jobs has the opportunity to speak fully and to be heard. And that's what I'm here to do. I have zero stake in the outcome. I don't care who wins or loses. Nobody has slipped me a $50 bill under the table, although that would have worked, just want to be clear. But what I care a great deal about is that everybody has the chance to be heard and has the chance to fully express themselves and their opinions and their positions. So that will be my job. The way we're going to do this, we're going to go in alphabetical order. And for those of you who are listening who have a last name that starts toward the end of the alphabet, as I do, what you may remember is from your own school days, how long it took to get to you. So what we're going to do tonight is we're going to go in alphabetical order, but we're going to do it in the reverse. So, you know, we'll actually start down the alphabet and work backwards rather than the other way around. However, to ensure that each candidate has the chance to go to speak first, to speak last, to speak in the middle, what we'll do is at each question, we'll simply move one candidate to the right, if you will. So, for example, if Bill starts the thing off, then the next question would go to Jim, and he would start it off. So we're going to simply move it down that line so everybody has a chance. The rotation completes obviously at the end of 4 questions, and we just start it over again. If you have questions, you may notice at the bottom of your screen there's a little box that says Q&A. If you want to send a question in, feel free to do so. Nobody in the room will see the question that you send. All of the panelists will. But nobody else who is watching as a member of the audience will see your question. I'll do my best, if we end up with a lot of questions, I'll do my very best to get to as many of them as possible. A lot of that has to do with 2 things, the time, and secondly, the extent to which the question you are asking is similar or the same as a question we were going to ask anyway. And we found that the last time we did one of these forums, that happened a lot because we live in the same town and we deal with a lot of the same issues. So with that as kind of my introduction, again, I want to welcome all of you here. For those of you who are political trivia buffs, today is also Jimmy Carter's 96th birthday, which I think is kind of a great day to be holding this kind of an event. So John, any comments from you? And we'll go ahead and get started. Are we good?
There's a question before we get started. Why is Sandy Davidson not here? I think you were going to.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that because I actually had that down. So we invited all 5 candidates. 4 of the 5 accepted our invitation, and Councilmember Davidson declined it. So that's why we have 4. Okay. then we're going to go ahead and get started. And Bill, as I said, you will begin the process of introducing yourself. You got 2.5 minutes, and here we go.
All right. Well, thank you for inviting me to the forum, and thank you to everyone in the audience who's taken the time to show up and hear us all talk. My name is Bill Sewell, and I'm running for City Council because the current council, in my view, and at least, seems to have problems getting things done. For example, shortly after 9/11, I was named a project manager on the Phoenix project in Virginia. And that team rebuilt the damage to the Pentagon in less time than the Pension Ad Hoc Committee has taken to produce a 31-page report. So I would like to bring my 50 years experience getting things done. And I've done that from advising federal governments on national 911 operations to improving airports across the globe and managing a multi-billion-dollar school construction program. And I've gotten it done in partnership with over 100 federal, state, and local governing bodies, and that experience is sorely needed on our city council. I started my career in the U.S. Air Force in Vietnam, worked for the FAA, worked in U.S. intelligence, and I finished my career as Senior Vice President at AECOM, one of the world's largest infrastructure companies, where, among other things, I led the Public Safety and Security Division. It was at AECOM that I became program director for the $6.5 billion LA Community College District construction bond program for 3 years, where my team took over a program in trouble and restored accountability, responsibility, integrity, and transparency. Almost 11 years ago, my wife Nancy and I took a drive through PVE and decided on the spot it's where we wanted to live. It was the rural feel, the relaxed atmosphere, and remembering my rambling in the woodlands when I was a kid. I'm a volunteer with the PVE Police VIP program, the Redondo Beach VIP program, and I'm a member of PVE's District Disaster Preparedness Program, or DDP. I also volunteer with FBI and DEA. It seems all candidates in this race have nearly identical platforms: financial stability, public safety, and affordability of our police, and preserving the character of our city, including fighting density and protecting our parklands. So how do you decide? Well, I think that's an easy answer. You elect the one person who has worked in and with governments and who has done it successfully for decades, and that's Bill Sewell. So let's get it done. I yield back the rest of my time.
Okay, so Jim, it's on you.
All right, hello everyone. Let me start by thanking PVRRG for hosting this forum and for the many PVE residents who are probably joining us tonight. I hope this event will give me an opportunity to share what distinguishes me as a candidate for City Council. My name is Jim Roos. My family and I live in Lunada Bay. I have 2 boys, ages 7 and 8, who attend Lunada Bay Elementary School. And like many of you, we chose to live in Palos Verdes Estates because it is the safest and most beautiful place in California. And I am running for City Council to help keep it that way. My goal in becoming a City Council member is to build bridges within our community. I want to ensure that our city is able to meet its objectives of securing public safety, retaining the character of our neighborhoods, maintaining the city's infrastructure and public areas, achieving fiscal sustainability, and serving the goal of enhancing the quality of life for all of our residents. I support keeping our PVE Police Department. I also support balanced budgets. I support efforts to tackle the city's unfunded pension liability. And I support efforts to protect our city's parklands. Our city faces many challenges in the coming years, and I am running to participate in solving all of them. I currently serve as a member of the city's Planning Commission, where I have sought to balance the interests of property owners and their neighbors, protect views and privacy, and ensure our city's neighborhood compatibility ordinance is faithfully applied. In that role, I have also had the opportunity to advocate for local control and development. Prior to being appointed to the Planning Commission, I served as the chair of the city's Technology Advisory Committee. And on that committee, I was involved in efforts to modernize the city's software systems and in setting policy on the deployment of 5G and other wireless technologies. Outside of my involvement with the city, I've been a member of the board of directors for the Lunada Bay Homeowners Association. a volunteer neighborhood association that sponsors many events throughout the year. It is also involved in various neighborhood improvement projects. In my professional career, I had a software engineering group for a major cybersecurity software company. In the 20-year span of my career, I've held increasing levels of responsibility at major technology companies, including Broadcom, Microsoft, and Symantec, and at a cybersecurity startup in which I was an early leader prior to its being acquired. I hope to bring all of my experience to bear as a member of your city council. Thank you again for having me this evening. I look forward to taking your questions.
Okay, thank you. Dawn, you're up.
Hi, I'm Dawn Murdoch, a 22-year resident of PVE with my husband Bob and our 4 children. I have a chemical engineering degree from Stanford and a UCLA MBA. I spent over 17 years in strategy and business operations consulting. And what this means is I bring strong fiscal acumen, problem solving, and collaboration skills to council. I was also a member of the PVE Pension Ad Hoc Committee, so I understand pensions better than any of the other candidates running. 2 council seats are available. We need to fill those seats with people who will collaborate and work effectively with council, residents, and staff to address the city's issues. This is my wheelhouse. My career has been about working with and leading teams of people across an organization to solve problems and implement improvements. Regarding our city's priorities, I will fight to keep our police and solve our financial problems, including pension costs. There's a campaign of misinformation going on out there regarding my position on PVE PD. So let me be clear. I will work tirelessly to keep our police and collaborate with council officers and residents to build a model that is sustainable, is affordable, has manageable pension costs, and provides stability to our officers, our city finances, and residents. I will also protect the character and charm of our city by never selling parklands, improving fire abatement, consistently enforcing neighborhood compatibility ordinance, fighting state mandates for high-density housing, and joining other cities in building coalitions to fight the seizure of local control. I will ensure full transparency to residents and staff regarding the city's issues, solutions, and progress relative to goals. And I will seek resident input via surveys and town halls and ensure major decisions, such as safety, align with the will of the voters. To do all of this, we need to work collaboratively, council, residents, and staff, to determine the right balance between what services our residents want and what they are willing and able to pay. I am ready to roll up my sleeves to do the work to keep our city the special place it is and one that our children deserve to inherit. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Gain.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Gain. First and foremost, I'd like to thank Michael Teal moderating this panel tonight. I'd also like to thank everyone at Palos Verdes Residents for Responsible Government behind the scenes that did so much hard work to make this work and happen. And also thank the other candidates for showing up. So I'm happy to be on this panel. Now let me introduce myself. Gain Brenneman. I'm a physician. I moved here approximately 20 years ago with my husband, to whom I've been married over 40 years. We had 2 kids. We wanted to send them to the schools here and the colleges. I'm now find myself semi-retired. I'm still working locally, but I want to contribute to the community. My credentials are that I achieved a BA degree in political science from University of California, Santa Barbara. My medical degree, internship, and residency in San Antonio, Texas, and my fellowship at University of Birmingham, and most recently attended Harvard Business School in complex negotiations and competitive deal making and strategies. Now that I'm semi-retired, I really want to share some of my skills that I've learned over a lifetime of training to diagnose problems and find solutions. I've held many positions in leadership and management positions, and now I would like to contribute to serving the city that I live in and love. Thank you.
Thank you all very much. What we're going to do then is we're going to get into the specific questions now. Bear with me because this is where the order will start. So Bill, once again, I'll ask you to go first for question number 1, and then starting with question number 2 and 3, we'll start to move around. You just got lucky and won the lottery, so you get to go first twice. So here's the first question for all candidates. And all of you have alluded to this in one way or another, which is, what is your assessment of our city's financial health? And what specific steps, if any, would you take within the first 90 days or so to improve it if you think it needs improving? So does that make sense to everybody? Do all of you have a chance to, do you understand that? We're good? Okay, Bill, you're up first. And please unmute yourself.
That would make good sense, yes.
For some people, yes. Go ahead.
Well, I think the biggest challenge in front of us really is our financial health, and particularly as it refers to pension obligations. We have a pretty big pension debt that needs to be addressed. And unfortunately, there's no tricks. There's nothing that can get us out of that. We have to pay that down. So I think one of the things that I would look for is to start to pull together new sources of revenue. I've put together a small group of folks. We're looking into some events that could bring in money to the city. I think that we also need to look for some efficiencies, but my observation is the city is working about as efficiently as it can. I can't see us, cutting staff or anything like that unless we want to cut services, and I don't want to do that. We need to look for reinventing the benefit systems for the employees. I think there are a couple of ways to do that. One is to look into becoming a charter city. I think that would help us to get a better benefit package for folks. There's another way would be to become a safety district where we would work with other cities on the Hill to have a police force that's shared both in cost and in service. So I think I would begin in the first 90 days looking at those things. I think that's a way to get the best bang for the buck early on.
Okay, great, thank you. Jim, you're up next.
Yeah,
So you need a repeat of the question, you're okay?
I think I understand.
Okay, very good. Go
So,
ahead.
the state of the city's finances, I think we could probably look to the state auditor's report. And we'll see that, the overall state of our finances is relatively healthy. The state auditor says that we're at low risk relatively from a fiscal standpoint, rates us green in that regard. But that's not to say that we aren't without our problems. And if you dig deeper into that report, you find that the most significant financial issue that we have facing us is future pension obligations, which they rate us as high risk on. So it's very clear to me that of the challenges fiscally that we have to addressing our pension obligations is the most pressing, and the one that our city council should be putting their attention to first. I'm very encouraged by the efforts of the Pension Ad Hoc Committee. The report that they released on Friday, I think, includes a number of options that I think reflect my perspective on the issue. I think we need to be paying 100% of the normal cost using a discount rate that accurately reflects the return that we can expect CalPERS to get. I believe we need to set a target funding level for our pension UAL, and we need to be making plans to try to achieve that. There are other options on the menu there that the committee has considered that I probably wouldn't want to pursue, including things like participating in the Fresh Start program, which is a CalPERS program that would, in my would constrain our flexibility and increase the likelihood of insolvency. But I think the report is a great start. I think the next city council is well positioned to tackle this problem. And I think that's the right place to go. Thanks.
Okay, great. Dawn?
Great. Well, thank you. You know, Michael, I would focus on a three-pronged approach. My first step would be to finish the city's strategic long-term plan, to make sure we've identified what the priorities and goals are, to make sure that we're deploying resources in the right place. So in order to run an organization well, you've got to make sure you're clear on your priorities and have the right resource alignment. I would also then, the second prong would be reducing expenses, and the third would be around raising revenues, particularly around non-tax. So let's talk about those. We've talked about the long-term plan. You know, it's really important to make sure that when you've got limited staff and limited time and limited money, that's all being applied to the priority issues that the city's facing. And that's something I look forward to working with the residents and staff to finish the work that was already started, but hadn't quite gone to that final step. Regarding reducing expenses, I agree with Bill that at some point you start to reach diminishing returns. I don't think we're quite there yet. I think we need to complete the operational reviews and figure out where there are efficiency opportunities to modernize and automate where it's practical, and also to look at where it makes sense to contract out services or enter into a broader shared service with our neighboring cities. There's opportunities, companies do that all the time, and that's something that it's different thinking for the government sector, but a place where we can have some opportunities. And I'm glad that both Bill and Jim talked about the need to better manage pensions. As somebody who was on the pension ad hoc committee, I completely agree with that. I'm not going to belabor that point since they both addressed that. Simultaneously, I would create a revenue ad hoc committee to look at new revenue opportunities. You bring together a group that includes residents and experts. There are a lot of creative ideas out there. I hear them when I'm going out door to door and talking to people. And we need a more comprehensive and structured approach than we've had to date. And what this would look like is you'd have a couple of town halls, you'd invite residents to throw in their ideas, you could have a survey, you could have a dedicated email address, and then the committee's job would be to evaluate those relative to a set of criteria to identify what makes sense and what doesn't make sense for moving forward. You know, one of the opportunities out there that I know is currently in the works is the work that's being done by the task force, who's looking at the golf club and the tennis club to see if there's a new service offering, maybe doing another pool or another gym to meet residents' needs. So my feeling is if we do the strategic plan, we look at reducing costs and increasing revenues, then we'll know where we stand and what kind of budget gap exists. And it's then time for a conversation, continuing conversation with residents around, this is what we have, this is where we are. How does the residents want to move forward?
Great. Thank you very much. Dane, thank you for your patience. It's your turn.
All right. So what I hear you saying is, what can we do for the first 90 days to try to attack our fiscal problems? And I agree with a lot of what's already been said. What I think that I got out of the pension ad hoc committee report, I agree with almost all of what they suggested, which was clearly make a more simpler budget, look at efficiencies. Can we use, if we get surplus, can we use some of that surplus to pay down some of those problems? So clearly, if the pension ad hoc committee report has just been published, can we look at it, study it, and say, what are the doable items in the 1 through 6 list? I don't think increasing taxes is doable, and certainly not doable in the first 90 days. And I don't suggest that. I think that creates more problems that we don't really want to get into. But certainly the other 5 suggestions, and looking at those very seriously. I absolutely agree with Dawn about, can we look at decreasing expenses? I have heard previous city council people discuss, we're almost at the bone, cut to the bone. But I think, we need to can we relook at it? Because apparently from 2013 to 2018, they added many more full-time employees that used to actually be subcontracted out. And then they became pensionable. So could we start the ball rolling and look at that in the first 90 days? Another thing we could do is in terms of revenue. Do you know about the beach club or the golf club, some of the concessionaires? So some of them are going to be coming up for renewal. And can we maximize more value to some of those clubs that we have? They're basically nonprofit except for the stables. But that can we maximize some of that? I know the beach club says that they're going to be doing more things to be more attractive. Sometimes they look kind of empty. So what can we do with that whole 3-tier suggestion? I think overall, we need to prioritize in the first 90 days, which problems do we want to attack first? So I agree with Don, we do need to prioritize things because there's no easy answer right away in the first 90 days.
Thank you, Dave.
I don't know how long I've been talking because there's no
You've been talking for a
timer.
minute and 45 seconds.
Okay, all right, I'll stop there.
Thank
Can
you
I have
very
a timer? Okay.
Yeah, I'm hoping you can see the timer on John's screen.
Okay.
Okay,
All right.
so Jim, we're gonna take you to the next, you'll be the first one to deal with the next question. Before we get there, I want to tell you, I've been getting some Q's and A's, I've been getting some chats, and what I'm noticing is that the vast majority of them, in fact, deal with things that we're planning to talk about. So those of you who have sent the stuff in, hang in there. I think most of what you're asking for will be responded to. If not, at least to your satisfaction, we can always come back. But in the meantime, Jim, I'm going to aim the next question at you. And this one is, it's interesting because all of you, in fact, brought this up again in your answer to the first question. But specifically, I'm going to ask you to maybe dive a little deeper into this pension issue. In terms of what would you actually do to solve our pension and the unfunded liability problem, which depending on who you talk to is as much as $19 million and certainly could go higher in the future. So Jim, let me start with you, and I invite all of you to take this question to the next level. Jim,
All
please.
right. So I have been addressing that in a lot of my communication to voters very specifically. I think that with respect to the normal cost, which is the expense that we accrue against current payroll, we need to be funding 100% of that. And I do think that that means probably using a discount rate that is something less than the 7% that CalPERS uses as their target rate of return. You know, I think our city council probably needs to establish a policy for what that discount rate should be. If you read the pension ad hoc report, there's some suggestion there of a best practice around using the 30-year risk-free rate of return and then a 2.5% premium on top of that. I don't know if I necessarily agree that there's a strong correlation between long bonds and CalPERS returns. I'd probably be more inclined to something like the 5-year average rate of return that CalPERS has had, which for their most recent 5-year period, I believe is like 6.3%. And then you'd adjust that every year based on that adjusted 5-year average rate of return. And then you're funding your current payroll pension obligation specifically against a discount rate that much more accurately reflects what CalPERS is likely to return. And then I think we set a target funding level for our unfunded liability. I think it's probably something like 90%. It's probably not 100%. There's always the risk of ending up being overfunded if CalPERS has, you know, for some reason ends up turning things around, and I don't think we want to get ourselves in that position. But we set a target level of maybe it's 90%. We develop a plan to achieve that. I would do that without availing ourselves of programs that tie our hands. I mentioned Fresh Start, which is a program of CalPERS that would it would lock us in to a shorter amortization period, and would prevent us from responding to market conditions or conditions in our tax base. That's it. Thank you.
Okay, is it
Don,
me?
you're next. Yep.
Okay, great. Great. Well, I'm glad that this question's on the table because as somebody who spent months and hours researching it, I'm glad to see that it's seen the light of day. It's regrettable that they weren't able to have the review or the report out discussion on Tuesday due to the presidential debate, but it's out there. And so I'm not going to belabor some of the points. I do want to just provide a little bit of context for those out there that aren't that familiar with what is the size or the issue related to pensions and why it's so important to address it to stabilize our costs. Payments are rising annually. So in 2016, our payments for our pensions to CalPERS were $1.2 million. This year, it's projected to be about 1.8 million. And in 2026, it's projected to be 2.9. That's a huge increase. And every time there's an increase, that's a squeezing out of services that we can be providing to the city. So that means the weeds are plenty, the trees are not trimmed regularly, fountains are sitting idle, and infrastructure is not being maintained. So we do need to cover that and address it. And worse, the payments that we're making are not even fully covering the cost of the pensions, which means that our liability just keeps growing and growing and growing, a bit like if you only paid the minimum amount on your credit card. So to address this, there's 3 steps. The first is we have to stop accumulation of new liability. And so Jim talked about that, about the normal costs and using a different discount rate. I'm not going to go through that. That's about fully funding the pensions. So at the end of the year, we're not hit with, oh, you owe us more money, and trying to stop that behavior from happening. There are other things we can do, though, to address the reduction or try and reduce future pension costs. One is around looking at our pensionable benefits and better managing those and increasing our use of non-pensionable benefits. So things like performance and retention bonuses, which still reward staff for excellence in behavior, excellence in performance, and loyalty, but it doesn't contribute to higher pension costs. The third thing we need to do in that area is to really have a culture shift when we're both among staff and council. Whenever we're talking about making a relevant financial decision, we need to make sure that we are factoring in the other implications, such as what the impact is going to be on pensions. And historically, we haven't had that conversation. And now that it's becoming so prevalent in people's conversations, I think we're ready for that. The second, Jim started to talk about developing a path to pay off our existing liability. That's something that we owe. It's something that we've committed to residents, and it's there, and we've got to find a way to fund that. Whether it's through dedicated financing, I think Gain might have talked about this around having a policy around ending fund balances, whether it's around a part of the budget, that there are things that we as residents need to talk about and come to a decision. I mean, there is a possibility. One of the things in the report talks about a temporary tax. The thing with that is it's like paying off your mortgage early. If you've got the funds, you pay it off early and you save the interest costs. If instead you have to—
I think we've got the end of the time now, Michael.
Okay, John,
Died halfway, but we're not at the end of the.
John, thank you very much. I wanted to let you know that at least on my screen, the time bar is no longer showing up.
Yeah, that's because it froze and I had to reboot it. So
I
we'll
see.
be fine now.
Okay, there you go. So,
Could
Don,
you repeat? I know
Yeah.
it's my turn. Can you repeat the first part of the question?
yes, I'd be happy to. And Don, I apologize because I wasn't able to watch the time.
That's
I'm going
fine.
to give you a little bit more of a heads up.
Okay.
Yes, Gain, the question, and again, John, as of this point, there's no clock, so I'm going to be depending
Okay.
on-
When she starts.
Okay, very good.
Okay.
The question is, what would you do to solve our pension, specifically the unfunded liability issue, given that it now exceeds maybe $19 million?
Yeah.
And
Okay. Yeah.
certainly be going up in the future. So,
Right.
yeah.
So two things, it looks like we've got to split it in two. There's what we call old debt, which is the unfunded liability, and new debt, which are current pensions. Measure E did not fill even meeting the current debt. We're about 2.1, a little bit more than that, $1 million short of fully funding even currently, from what I understand from the reports. Now let's talk about the old debt. So the old debt, which is the unfunded, we absolutely owe that to people who did work for the city. I agree with Dawn. That is an obligation we have to meet. So I looked at the pension report and I looked at all of the 6 options that they talked about, other than one of them was make the budget look simpler to all the residents, which I totally agree with. Make it look simple. You know, clearly re-amortization from a 30-year fixed to a 15-year fixed, or can we add some balloon payments, or can we create a 115 with the surplus that we get, even though there is no surplus? Can we do a few balloon payments to make it look a little bit better? Can we take some money from this general fund and push it over? You know, really all of those depend on number 5, which is raise taxes. I really think we need to be more creative. Raising taxes opens an entire can of worms for everyone, let alone during COVID-19. Some people don't have their jobs. They're barely hanging on. I know that doesn't sound like PVE, but there are people out there. So I really think we need to be more creative. And I like Don's idea of the revenue committee. Get a committee together and let's all get our heads together, get more money in. Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right, so we're going to move to the next question. By the way, again, just a heads up for those of you who are sending things in, we've gotten a number of questions regarding the police, funding the police, all of that. And so for candidates, the next 3 questions are going to be specifically around the police issues. So
Bill hasn't spoken yet, Michael.
Yeah, I was going to say, before we move on, could I answer?
oh, I am so sorry because I just got a note here from your wife saying, dude, you forgot Bill.
I am not surprised at
apologize.
that.
So please go ahead, Bill. I'm
Quite all
sorry.
right. Well, I think everyone has pretty much gone over the ad hoc report, and we were pretty much in agreement. One thing I would disagree on is about shortening the amortization period. I think if we can do that and do it successfully, it will save us interest. So that's something we need to look at. Another thing is how we raise more revenue without taxing. There is a tax that doesn't affect all residents, so we might look at that. That's the real property transfer tax. Right now, it's we're at $1.10 per thousand, and that's basically the minimum that the county allows. But there are other cities in the state that are anywhere from $4 to $35 per thousand. And none of them have seen a decrease in real estate sales because of that. So I think that's something we need to take a hard look at, run models and see how that'll help us out. But I think that could result in a couple of $1 million extra in the coffers. And that's it for me.
Okay, thank you very much. I promise not to forget you again. For those of you who are watching, believe me, this is the first time any of us have done this. So just patience. We'll make this work. Okay, so the next question, and Don, you'll be the first one up on this one, I hope, near as I can tell. And as I said, the next 3 questions are going to be coming at the issue of the Palos Verdes Estates Police Department from 2 or 3 slightly different angles. I think a number of you, again, who have sent questions in around that may find that your questions are at least partially answered by these next 3. The first one, and Don, you'll be the first one to kick this one off, is I think all of you have stated your support for the current police department. But what specific changes would you advocate to make it affordable without any additional taxation? And sort of a second part, if it turns out you can't get there without looking at the possibility of new taxation, is that the kind of thing that you would sort of wait to see if you could get it passed by voters? Or would you start to proactively look at some different options if we can't get there, without at least the possibility of new taxes? But the initial question really is, what do you have on your agenda that would say we can keep our police department without having to raise taxes? And Dawn, you're first one up on that.
Okay, great. Thank you. You know, as I go door to door, overwhelmingly, the majority of people tell me they want to keep our police. And there is that concern about how do we keep it affordable? And so as leaders in the city, we need to do our best effort to uncover every rock to do that. So I look at this as in two ways. I look at, and many of you probably saw the mailer that came out in the last day or two. So what we really need is a sustainable, affordable solution with manageable pension costs. There are things we can do in the short term. Some of that Chief Dreiling is doing right now when he's looking at efficiency and cost effectiveness. So he's looking at staffing numbers and staffing levels, and he's looking at the potential for outsourcing jail and dispatch. He's the expert. I look to him to tell us what he thinks makes sense to have the most efficient and cost-effective department possible. We've talked a bit about pensions. I'm not going to, belabor that point, but that's a key part of making our police department affordable. Longer term, there's an opportunity to expand, or we need to at least do the due diligence to expand the police department to a multi-city police district. By doing that, if we expand it to another city, we're able to create a new entity, which takes them out of being a PVE employee and required to be in CalPERS to something where we can create a different type of compensation plan. We can pay them more today, more money in their pocket. We can give them a defined contribution pension plan, and there are benefits for both residents and staff.
Great, thank you so much. Gain, you're up next.
Thank you. So we're back to revenue, because if we look at the city, according to what I've heard from the chief, he has again cut things very close to the bone. I think if we looked at the police overall, you have to look at what could you cut out of the police line items issues, like what about miscellaneous benefits, overtime, health benefits, can those be radically changed or not even radically, just somewhat changed? Because once you add in everything of the base salary plus the pension and these other miscellaneous things along the way, it really morphs into a monster of a budget, but almost 80% of our budget. And like Don says, it's crowding out our other services. Our weeds are somewhat overgrown on a lot of the parklands, and that's creating a fire hazard. So what about the revenues? What can we do to increase revenues so we can make the police more sustainable? Well, after we look very closely at the spending line item on each one for the police department and all the ancillary services, someone else brought up, can we rent equipment instead of buying it outright? Many other items that the police might use. For instance, one other example no one's mentioned is we're getting only 60 cents on the dollar for the sewer for the trade-off. It's like a cap and trade from the SCE for the electricity to build underground utilities from Rolling Hills. Well, I would ask for dollar for dollar. Why should we give them a discount rate? So that's just one example I came up with, other than a lot of other things that some of the bell ringers that attend City Hall all the time, they list, oh, wow, they found $500,000 of expenses that they can save. That's a lot of money. So yes, I think it could be sustainable if we really look hard. Thank you
very much. Okay, Bill, I think you're up.
Good. All right. Yeah.
That was a close one.
All right. Well, I think one of the main things we need to look at is basically how the police department is structured. I agree with Dawn that if we look outside of our city and partnering with other cities on the Hill to put together a safety district, it gives us some latitude in redefining benefits. Another way to do that is to become a charter city. If we look into becoming a charter city, that gives us more local control of basically of everything we do. We would still be subject to the California Constitution, but we'd get to write our own charter, our own Constitution. And that could allow us to redefine benefits, pay better salaries, have a better retirement plan, a 401k or something like that. It doesn't have to be that exactly. But I think there are a lot of opportunities out there, both for having local control, for raising money, for having better control over taxes, keeping them lower. So I would suggest that we look strongly at becoming a charter city and making that application.
Okay, great. Jim, I think you're up next.
All right. Let me start by stating unequivocally that I support keeping our PVE police department. And that is a central theme of my campaign. And I believe that that is a completely affordable thing for us to do. So many people have mentioned the police ad hoc effort and what our interim police chief, Dan Dreiling, has been doing, looking at the possibility of outsourcing dispatch or outsourcing the jail. And I've talked to him about some of those things. So outsourcing the jail means maybe contracting with Redondo Beach or with Torrance, and means a reduction in our service level, because when someone needs to go to the jail, they have to drive out to the jail out in Redondo Beach, and that takes up time. If talking about some of the options for outsourcing our dispatch, in his estimation, and we'll see when his report comes out, he actually thinks most of those options are going to end up being more expensive. Now, I'm open-minded about that, and I think we'll see what he comes back with, and I want to make sure we're doing the right thing. But ultimately, we enjoy a much more substantial level of service than most of our neighbors. I want to also address some of the discussion about a peninsula-wide police force. We don't have a lot of great partners for which that makes sense. If you look at Rolling Hills Estates, it's a city with about half the population. They are ranked in the state auditor's report as moderate risk. They're the only city on the Hill that isn't low risk. So they're not a great partner. And RPV is a city of almost 50,000 people. And so we don't really have local control if we're joining police forces with them. So thank you so much.
Okay, and again, we're going to have a chance to come back to a couple of these things with the next couple of questions. So, Bill, we're going to start with you. We've actually done the full rotation. Let me go ahead and put the question out there. You've talked about a number of different options, all of you have. As a council member, would you advocate getting a sheriff's feasibility study? And if so, what constraints, if any, would you place on it? In other words, would you ask for a feasibility study on the so-called standalone or Cerritos model, where Cerritos basically contracts with the sheriffs to have a standalone sheriff's unit at their city? Or would you look at something more like what some of our partners on the Hill have done relative to basically contracting with the sheriff across the board with those three different cities? So I would be interested to hear your thoughts regarding a sheriff's feasibility study, and if so, what type you might advocate. And Bill, you're up.
Well, I've gone back and forth on whether or not to get a feasibility study. One part of me says, in order to be able to make good informed decisions, you have to have all of the information. And so to do that, it would require a feasibility study. I would look at a standalone, and I would hope that if we did look at this, we would look at ways to protect our own officers. But I think on the other hand, the sheriff wants to charge us, I think it's $100,000 or something like that, or 125. And really, I've done a lot of government procurements, and I've never had a contractor come to me and say, I want to give you a bid for certain services, but I want to get $125,000 from you to do that. So I'm a little up in the air on that one, but I think I lean more towards not doing it.
Okay. And as I've been reminded yet again, I managed to miss one of you. So for the several of you who've written and said, gee, Michael, you're doing a great job. You may want to get rid of those. So
You're fired. No.
Yeah, pretty much, right? I'm going to apologize and let you go now, which you actually should have gone first. And then we'll pick it up from there. So the question is around a sheriff's feasibility study.
Who are you asking? Me?
Yes.
Okay, great.
Because had I
Okay.
done it right,
So-
Gene would have gone first and Bill would have gone second.
Okay.
But
All right. All right. I'll let you make it up. Stay
Thanks.
after school. Okay.
yeah, right.
I would absolutely ask for that. I think you could renegotiate the cost of getting that sheriff feasibility study. I'm not sure that we need to pay that. I think a lot of times, very much like Bill Sewell mentioned, a lot of times in competing for government contracts, I was not aware that way up front, they're just going to ask for that kind of money. They are going to put some time and effort into it. I did think that we had already had a sheriff study in the past. I'm not sure how comprehensive that study was. I want to say something like 2017. And it didn't sound like it was comprehensive. It didn't sound like we were able to compare apples to apples. But for sure, I would ask for one now, because I think in a lot of ways, the sheriffs are really our backups. For our police, like for instance, the riot control that we had recently, the sheriffs had to come in, or if we have big events or whatever, we are relying on the sheriff in some way. So already we have a blended picture. Again, the dispatch has had, I think, 1 or 2 or maybe 3 lawsuits against them for failure to respond, or it got rerouted to Torrance or something like that. I think we really need to take a look at the dispatch. That's imperative for people's safety and making sure that that our current police can respond immediately, regardless of who's going to be responding. So yes, the answer is yes.
Okay, great, thank you. Jim, you're up next.
Yeah, I am not opposed to getting a sheriff's feasibility study. In fact, I think that, frankly, the police ad hoc is asking them for a bid in any case. I frankly do not expect that it would realize a lot of savings for us unless they were trying to lowball us. The reality is that if we want to keep the same level of service that we have, if we wanted to adopt something like the Cerritos model, about the only thing that we would eliminate is our chief of police. And while that is an expense, if you divide that by the 5,000 households in this city, I think it's one that is quite manageable. I frankly would be very concerned about contracting with the sheriff, regardless of what their bid came back as. And I think the best example of why we should be cautious in that regard is the fire contract that we have. Our contract with the county to provide fire services is now at almost $6 million. In this fiscal year, they increased that contract by 7%. We have no negotiating leverage with the County of Los Angeles. We are a speck of dust out in a corner of the county that they see only as a place where they can solve their own funding problems. And so I would not be supportive of moving to the county sheriff. That's it. Thank you.
Okay. Dawn.
Okay. So I get to go last this time. I agree with various pieces that each of the people have said. I agree with Bill that in order to make good decisions, it's important to have information, and residents need to be informed about the alternatives and, you know, what their choices are. It's strange for me to pay for an RFP that, you know, in my line of business, we just didn't pay. And I think you asked about what type of an RFP we would put out, were we to put out, right?
Yes.
And so, you know, my experience has been a little bit more, I haven't seen the details of the existing RFP, but in my experience, you define the set of services that you want to receive, right? And you say, I want this level of service and that level of service and these things. And then you turn it out there and you have the vendors or whoever you're getting the bids from tell you what it would cost for them to provide that level of services. You know, I want the roads patrolled 3 times, each street done 3 times a week or something. And then they come back to you with what the costs are rather than constricting how they actually do the work. So, you know, I'm interested in seeing what the vendors come back with and with respect to the level of services that the residents want, and that we look at those comparisons, and that helps us understand our cost structure. But for me to pay for it, I'm with Gain. I'd like to see if there's some way to negotiate.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Okay, so in spite of my best efforts, we actually got through the entire circle. And this next one we'll start with Bill. And for the individual who asked the question whether Neil Stewart and John Harbison wrote all the questions, the answer is no. And here's going to be an example of that. We actually got this question in from our website. And since it came up regarding sort of looking at the fire services, which are a county service, you know, versus having our own police force, we had a question that came in and asked, you know, given the importance of safety here, which is clearly one of the top priorities, can you talk a little bit about your understanding of the relative costs between, you know, what it takes to contract with a county in terms of the fire versus what we're paying for the police, and how can those two best be managed? So Bill, if you want to start with that one, and we'll go around. So we're looking at fire versus police, county service versus local service. Bill, you need to, Terria, take off your mute button.
Sorry about that.
Can we restart it? Perfect, thank you. Okay,
I'll forget it every time.
Yeah,
So our contract with County Fire and the cost of the police, taking out pension costs, are pretty similar. So, you know, in comparing those two, I think the costs are quite similar. The tough part with contracting out, and this kind of something that Jim talked about a little bit, is we don't have control of the cost if we've contracted it out. The county increases, as Jim said, this year 7%. When I was working at LA Community College District, the sheriff was our security force. And we had a very good personal relationship with many of the folks that work there. But every year they would come back and say, okay, I need 2 more sworn at this school. I need another one at that school. I need a 7-8% increase. And I don't know, but I suspect that the captain there got a bonus if she sold us a couple more people, but I don't know that for a fact. Anyway, I think that our experience with County Fire really points out why we should not contract with the sheriff. And I'm at 10 seconds, so I won't start another topic.
Okay, fine. Thank you. I hope we have a chance to get to it. Jim, you're up next.
Yeah, so I mean, this relates really to my answer to the last question, and I'm happy to expand on that. You know, the fire contract is almost $6 million. We pay a couple $1 million for police services than we do for fire. To me, it's very clear. I mean, there's no question in my mind that we get a lot more value out of our police department for the dollars we're spending there than we get out of the fire department. The public simply does not interact with the fire department as closely and as frequently as we do the police department. In fact, you know, when there was a fire not far from my home here in Lower Lunada Bay, a couple of months ago, it was Officer Aaron Belda who ran in and pulled out some of the residents. So, which is not to diminish the contribution of the members of the fire service there, but I definitely feel like we get more value out of the police department. We also have in the Police Officers Association a partner that we can work with to control costs. And someone with whom, frankly, we have negotiating leverage, which is very different than what we have in our relationship with the county. The county demands and the state requires that we provide fire service, and there is nothing that we can do to negotiate with them. They will ask us for whatever they want, and we will have to pay whatever they ask. Thank you.
Thank you. Dawn?
Okay. Well, both Bill and Jim talked about the fire being about 6 and the police being about 7. That adds up to 13 million, or roughly 70% of our budget. So safety is the predominant cost that the city bears. In terms of best management, you know, as they stated, there's just limited options with the fire department because they're contracted and they're pretty much the only game in town. So we can work with them to try and understand the rationale for their 7.7% increase this year, try and negotiate reductions or identify modifications. You know, it's limited. The majority of the calls tend to be paramedic kind of calls. I don't know if there's an opportunity there. But because the police are our own department, we have more options, and they will work with us much more so than the fire department will. We can do some of the things I talked about earlier around improving efficiencies and cost effectiveness. We can better manage the pension costs. We've talked about that, about the funding and the pensionable benefits. But what this gives us is an opportunity for all to come to the table. The police officers, the residents, and the city, to talk about what are the services that best meet what the residents need and what they can afford, and how do we all work together to come up with a solution. Because the best thing for the city and for the police and for the residents is to have a financially stable city and a partner to work with to create that.
Great, thank you very much. Jane?
Yes, thank you. So the fire, from the numbers that I've got, around 5.5 million, and the police around 7.2. Now the 7.2 million doesn't include the unfunded pension liabilities. So again, we're back to old debt. So are they going to create new debt? If you looked at the pension ad hoc committee report, it discussed what were the miscalculations by CalPERS. 56% of the miscalculations were based actuarially, and 44% were because they miscalculated the rate of return. Now, what I'd like to bring up is the big gorilla in the room. The reason the actuarials were wrong is because everybody's living longer. So in the future, the current police force we have today may live to 100. So 7.2 million is nothing if you add in the 21 million or 19 million, however much you want to add for the unfunded pension liability. So you owe the people that have already retired and may live to 100, and the new people coming on and may live to 110. It's ballooning every year. As Jim Roos has so substantially pointed out, that's going to be worse in the future. We don't have a handle on that. So what we need to do is relook at everything. Like Donna suggested, let's come back to the table, look at everything, because these numbers are moving. They're very big moving targets. The homeowners and citizens here rely on us to get the numbers right now, from the past, which we didn't, and moving forward. Okay. So that's what I have to say.
Thank you very much. Let's see. I wanted to bring up something that actually came in as one of the questions tonight, and it had to do with going back to the whole issue of increasing revenue, that the city can take steps to increase its revenue. And I think several of you talked about, yeah, we got the beach club, we got the Staples, you know, we got that. And this particular question was, that's great, what else? You know, are you suggesting those three things would actually sort of take care of a revenue issue? Or if not, what else can you see on the table that could really substantially increase our revenue within the city of Palos Verdes? And Jim, if I'm not completely wrong, I think you go now. You go first.
I am. I'm
Okay.
first. All right. Well, let me start by saying that I am not in favor of trying to milk the concessions for a lot more money. I do think that there are some opportunities there to the extent that we work in partnership with maybe with the golf club and the tennis club to increase amenities if they want to do that and things like that. But you know, those concessions exist for the benefit of our residents. They already provide some revenue to the city. There may be opportunities for them to provide more, but it wouldn't be my goal to try and turn them into a substantially larger revenue pool for the city. I have sent a mailer specifically rejecting the idea of a new tax that would be targeted at our pension liability, although I do believe that our pension liability needs to be addressed. I don't think a new tax for that specific purpose is the right approach. I think that there is an opportunity for us to seek grants and to hire a grant writer. There's been some folks who have been sort of skeptical of that because you know, grants are for specific projects, but the reality is the city has a lot of obligations that could benefit from grant writing. We have a ton of ADA requirements on the buildings that the city owns, and there's probably a lot of federal and state money that can be put to that purpose instead of having it come out of our general fund. So I think that is a great place for us to start. And I'm almost out of time, so I'll leave it there.
Okay, fine. Thank you so much. Dawn?
Okay, I agree with Jim in terms of not milking the concessions. I do believe there's an opportunity to create a new concession or a new service offering which could bring in more money. Concessions currently bring in about $1 million, so we're probably talking about another couple hundred $100,000. But you know, it all adds up. Grant writing, you know, for me, it's really more about finishing the city's strategic plan and figuring out what the priorities are. And then if you have something on the priorities list that would lend itself to a potential grant, maybe some of the infrastructure stuff, it makes sense, but I wouldn't put the cart before the horse and hire a grant writer before I actually knew what I wanted to work on, because otherwise you have a product trying to find a market. So I have a little bit of a different take on that. Although I do, you know, recognize that the police department recently got a $13,000 grant for disaster preparedness education materials. So they had a need and they found a funding source for it. So that's excellent. I talked a little bit earlier about a revenue ad hoc committee to try and identify ideas. You know, I made a post on Nextdoor. People have a lot of ideas, but we need to go through the exercise of vetting those ideas. I heard things about a farmer's market, food truck nights, a boutique hotel, day spa. I know paid parking's out there somewhere. Bill brought up transfer tax that would require shifting to or changing to a charter city, but worth investigating. Somebody told me that Manhattan Beach does federal block grant money that they then sell to other cities and transfer that into general fund. There are ideas out there. We just need to pursue them.
Thank you so much. Gain, I think you're next.
Yes, revenue. So yes, I have seen some of those ideas on Nextdoor. I've seen some ideas being shared for 24-hour parking meters. People actually love the Queen's Necklace view and maybe they'll pay to park there. The transfer tax, like Bill Silla said, other ideas of the wedding house, you know, private partnership things together with private and public, where the private investors buy the land, we rent it back or something. Generally, those don't net a lot of money. And like Don is saying, some of this might be just pennies, but the pennies do add up. I would like to say that the revenue ad hoc committee, I think, is the strongest idea we have out there. And that if we can get all the ideas together, and there are very, very talented people out there. There's some very talented people actually currently on our city council that come up with some of these ideas. So if we can implement them, create an urgency to them and say, well, okay, what can we do for volunteers? I'm amazed that some of the HOAs, the sub-area HOAs have 66 employees volunteering in the group. So can we get those volunteers? For example, we're all competing to voluntarily lend our services and talent to the city to be on the city council. So can we get more of that? And this is actually very competitive. So there you have it.
There you do. Thank you. Bill, I think you're next.
All right. Well, I agree pretty much with what everyone has said so far. I think those are some great opportunities. There's a couple of others that come to mind. And one is, I wonder if the city should look into patrons. I had a knee problem the other day, and I went to Torrance Memorial to the Lundquist Emergency Department. And Lundquist is a resident of PVE, and so I got to thinking, well, so how come people don't leave money to our city? I know that happens in some cities, but it's something I think we should encourage and perhaps look into how we can get patrons signed up. Another is events. I work with the VIP program in Redondo Beach. They have their 5K, 10K run, as well as the Super Bowl 10K. And they make about a couple $100,000 off of each one of those. The Super Bowl pull in about $300,000 to $400,000. So we have a lot of bicycles that show up in our neighborhoods on the weekends. Why not organize them into a Tour de Hill? And everybody dresses like they're in the Tour de France anyway. So why not have a Tour de Hill and make some money? Another thing to look at is perhaps some redevelopment in Malaga Cove in the shopping district. Right now, there's only one reason to go there pretty much, and that's to go to the ranch market. And then there's real estate, a lot of real estate folks there. So maybe look at some other retail and other things there.
Okay, thank you very much. So all of those are, frankly, just taking my facilitator hat off for a second. Those all sound like pretty cool ideas. And let me just ask now sort of the other question there, or the flip side. Suppose at some point we say, you know, we got to start looking at taxes. Under what circumstances would you advocate an additional parcel tax or bond? And how would you seek it? I mean, how much would you seek, and how do you think that might be structured? Do you have any sense that voters think that would be a good thing to do, a bad thing to do, someplace in the middle? So question here has to do with under what circumstances might you advocate, you know, an additional tax or a bond? And I believe, Dawn, we start with you.
Okay.
Did I get that right? I think I did. Yeah, Ruth did. Okay. So yes, please, Dawn.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Bill, John, can you go ahead and restart the timer? Thank you. Yeah, thank you very much. Okay, please, Dawn.
But, you know, this has been a topic that's come up a lot as I've gone door to door. And I believe that as city leaders, we need to make sure we've done our best to have as efficient and cost-effective departments as we can. And we've looked at non-tax revenue options. Once we've done that, we hit the situation that you're talking about, Michael, is there's still a budget gap. What do we do? Yeah. And that's where we're having conversations with residents around priorities. What needs to be done urgently? What doesn't? How much do we need to accomplish that? And those are the discussions we have around trade-offs. I can't put a number on what size a tax would be because I don't know what that gap is. We haven't done our long-term plan. We haven't looked at all the factors. Okay. Bonds, you know, I tend to not be a big fan of bonds, although I realize they have a place. Bond, it's hard to do a bond when we can't pay our current bills, right? And so when you do a bond, you're not only paying it back, but then you have to pay that lump sum at the end. And so that's just putting additional burden on the city. So really what we need to do is make sure we're getting the most value out of the money that we have. We need to then identify what the gap is, sit down with residents, and have a conversation around priorities and funding, and what are the things that they feel need to happen, and what are the things that they're willing to pay for. And at the end of the day, whether it's a tax or it's a bond, it's got to be voted on by the residents. It can't be something passed by council, any of these certificates of participation or other things. Anything that puts a substantial financial burden on residents has to be voted on by the residents.
Thank you. Jane, I think you're up next.
Thank you. So about, would I ever be in favor of a tax ever? I can never say the word never, never, but I almost want to say it here. What I noticed about taxes, I used to live in a small community where they raised the taxes. When people really can't afford the tax, and in this case, it would be a double tax because we now have a cap of 10,000 per person, or joint if you're married filing jointly. If you have that tax, what people tend to do as they get older, if they're retired, they'll then start renting out their homes to pay the taxes. I saw that in Coronado, and it created tremendous, tremendous parking problems, air pollution, traffic, unbelievable traffic. It's actually worse now than it ever was, and just made the density unlivable, uncomfortable. It's very, very, very high density. People will do what they need to do to stay in their home. And I understand that. So I also don't like the idea of what Torrance did to collateralize their streets. That was unbelievable. I absolutely vote against what they did in Torrance, in the case of Torrance. The question is whether we could come up with even a sliding scale tax, or can we exempt people that wouldn't be subject to the tax in a certain income bracket? We're now talking about tax. Can a tax be fair and equitable and achieve the goal that it set out to be? I think a lot of the problem with the parcel taxes is they're just across the board, and some people live in homes that they're large homes. They've lived there 50 years. My mother's lived in her house 50 years. So should she be punished because it's taxed per square foot plus lot? So I really think we shouldn't really think of the tax as accomplishing a goal. It's really the law of unintended circumstances. Thank you.
Okay. Bill, I think you're next.
Well, I think we should consider a tax only as a last resort. Everyone I've talked to is worried about tax, particularly when we start talking about the pension debt that we have and how we're going to pay it off. People have told me, they don't want it paid off in 10 years. They want it paid off in 4. They want to get it out of their way. So I think there are a couple of taxes that we can look at. I think that the transfer tax probably affects the fewest people and is more fair. Special tax takes 2/3 of the residents to pass it. Honestly, I don't think it would pass, even if it had the best of intention and was for services that we really need. I don't think we could get 2/3 of the residents to agree to it. General tax, we can get by with a 50% voter approval. The problem there is that money then goes into general fund and can be used for anything. So, who knows if it would be used for the right thing. So I generally, as I said before, I generally think that we should not raise taxes if there's just any way around it. And, based on the question, I'm not sure, what the gap is, so I couldn't say, what's the best approach for it.
Okay, thank you very much. Jim?
Yeah, so I'll start by just answering the question very directly. I would not support a new parcel tax or bond. I do think that the city is likely, after we complete our analysis after the Finance Advisory Committee updates its report from last November, that we're going to decide that we probably need more revenue. Let me tell you a story that, you know, this city, after the passage of Prop 13, passed its first parcel tax to help bridge the gap between what was being pulled in through property taxes and what was required in order to operate the city. And for over 30 years, the city regularly renewed that parcel tax without issue, usually by margins of 80+%. My goal is that if we need to go back to taxpayers and ask them for more money, is that we are returning to that model where we have a plan that everyone can understand. We have broad consensus in our community that this is what is necessary to achieve it, and that we put on the ballot, say, a modification to Measure E that addresses some of the limitations that were necessary in order to get that passed. So Measure E passed without an inflator. And now we're in the third year of Measure E, and it's still only $5 million, even though our contract with the county for the fire department is up 7% this year, and 6% last year. You know, that's just not a sustainable model. You draw those lines out into the future, and it is no wonder that the city will eventually be cash flow negative. And the solution to that is obvious. Have a parcel tax to bridge the gap, and ask voters to approve one tax on a regular basis. We renew it every 8 years or 10 years, so we don't have to constantly have this debate over and over again. That's what I propose. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Next question, and this has to do with something that I'm sure is on most of our minds anytime we happen to turn on the news these days, which has to do with fire, and specifically wildfires. As I'm sure all of you are aware, California classifies this hill as one of its highest, in its highest fire risk category. So specifically, what steps would you take to mitigate this risk? This is something obviously that affects all of us. And Gain, we'll start with you.
Yes, I'm glad to be starting with this question. I know a lot about fire risk because I'm right above a canyon that the weeds are overgrown, and I get very, very worried that it's going to catch on fire. And I think within the last few years, there was even one over on Silver Spur. LA City has a really, really nice plan. They have every single parcel or lot labeled, earmarked, etc., on a giant map. I think it's linked in with the property tax map. And what they do is, if you don't meet the fire restrictions that their fire departments throughout, I guess, LA City have put out in the guidelines, like the vegetation has to be so far from the house, the hedges can't be over 6 feet to 8 feet maximum. They don't want fire-prone type hedges that have high resin in them, like ficus hedges do. They don't want certain evergreens that just hold on to the heat and radiate all the embers that are particularly fire-prone. And then if you miss the inspection, they fine you $100 if I remember correctly. And then it goes up. So there are fines, real cash fines, that if you're not in compliance with what the fire department says for your home. Now I called them up and I said, why don't we have that? And they said, oh no, we live Palos Verdes Estate alone. They handle everything themselves. And I said, but look at all the fire risks we have, and we're a high risk neighborhood. And they said, no, we're told not to touch it. I even had the fire truck come out and say, look at this. We have giant, this and that and this and that. And they go, nope, can't do anything because they don't have enforcement powers here. But everybody within LA City, I would adopt their plan.
Okay, great, thank you. Bill, same question to you.
Sure. I talked with some of the fire guys at the fire station about the very question, and so I asked, so we have a lot of brush and things of that nature. What's the answer? What can you guys do to help us out? And the answer was the same thing that Gain got. They said we can't do anything. This all belongs to the city, and we don't touch it. So I got to thinking, you know, how in the world can we partner with our residents to reduce our fire risk? Well, part of it is, I think, education. There was an email that went around from Marcel Herrera either today or yesterday that talked about fire and forming defensible zones around your house. You know, where trees should go, how far away, you know, what kinds of different hedges, that sort of thing. And I think we need to keep people informed. We also need a mitigation plan for the city that causes us to clear brush and things like that on a regular basis. And it's part of, you know, it's just part of what happens in our city. I talked with them a little bit about evacuation and how we would do that. There are only 7 entrances to PV, so they said probably your best bet is just pick whatever one where there's not a fire and go for it. So, okay, well, that's a great plan. So anyway, I think we need to focus mostly on clearing brush and creating defensible zones around our homes.
Okay, great. Thank you. Jim, I think you're up next.
Sure. So let me start by saying this. You know, I think it's worth noting. I think we're about an hour and a half into this, and by my count, I think this is the first question that hasn't been finance related. And I think that is an important point to make because, you know, our city was founded to avoid being annexed by Los Angeles. It was founded for the purpose of providing public safety and to protect our parklands, to protect the deed restrictions and make sure that the character of our neighborhoods was maintained. And I think it is notable to some degree here that the discussion about finance generally, and I'm not talking specifically in this forum, but just generally, sometimes crowds out a lot of issues like this. And fire risk is a very important issue, obviously. We have it in spades, and especially in upsloping areas where there is a very substantial risk of a fire ladder being created. And I think the city has to be on top of those things, and we need to elect leaders who are prepared to do the entire job of a city council member, prepared to address fire safety, prepared to address and maintain views, prepared to deal with neighborhood compatibility, prepared to provide public safety, and prepared to address pension liability and imbalanced budgets and all of those things that are required that really are just table stakes for doing the business that we all want the city to do. Thank you.
Got it. Thank you. Dawn?
Great. Well, what Jim just talked about it really alludes to what I was talking about regarding needing to have a long-term plan and understanding what our priorities are and what are all the different services that we need to provide. And one of the problems is that with the cost reductions that have happened recently, you know, weed control and tree trimming has just not made the cut, and it's putting us at risk. And there are 2 elements to this. One is the parklands and the city area, right? So what we need to do is we need to assess all the fire hazards and have an inventory around the weeds and the shrubs and the trees to identify where the risks are and remediate as appropriate. We need to review the frequency to ensure that it's appropriate and we have sufficient budget. Some types of areas or vegetation might need more frequent trimming than others. And so I appreciate that the city manager has brought in a new contractor because the last one wasn't doing as good of a job. And we just need to ensure that as part of that contract, there's a quality review component to make sure that the work is getting done well. So one piece of it, as I said, was the parklands and the open spaces, and we need to monitor those. Maybe we need to do abatement multiple times a year. But the second piece, I forget which one of the other candidates talked about, is really around the homes. You know, I appreciate that the fire department, I can't remember what frequency, but I've I live across from a canyon. I've got a lot of trees on my property, and the fire department comes and does an assessment of my home and tells us where we're at risk and where we're not. And that really helps us to know if we're doing a good job of managing, as Bill says, the defensible spaces. So there's also education of the residents that's required. And I think that email that Marcel sent out had a video from the LA County Fire Department. And so we've got to put both pieces together, resident responsibility and city responsibility.
Great, thank you very much. So this next question is going to be sort of a two-parter, if you will. And so let me kind of put both parts out there, and then you can address it. One part has to do with the so-called ADUs, or accessory dwelling units. And the question there is, given that there are some new state laws like AB 670 that take away local control on zoning, including overriding existing CCNRs, from a city council point of view, what, if anything, do we do about that? And then let me tie that also to the other issue, which is the mandate that we have a certain number of areas zoned for so-called low-income housing. This is also coming from the state. And there seems to be at least some evidence that one of the ways that they might want to see that would be to take existing parkland and put such housing on that parkland. So both of these issues, while not the same, I think have some linkage between the two of them. And so what I'd like to hear from you all is your position, your thoughts, what should we do, what can we do? And Bill, I'll start with you.
Okay. So I have a personal opinion about some of these bills that have come down, overriding our CCNRs. I believe very strongly that they're unconstitutional. I think if taken to court, they'll be thrown out. So I think what we need to do is we need to join up with other cities. Torrance is putting together a consortium of cities throughout the state, as many as they can get, and speak with a louder voice. Just because we're a bigger organization, we can share costs and go into court. But I think if we go to court, that we'll get these overturned. On low-income housing. The city manager made a statement the other night at a meeting that we only have to zone for low-income housing. We don't actually have to build it. I think that gives me some comfort that we can have a little better local control of that. At least I hope so. But I think the most important thing right now is to get with other cities and really get aggressive in going after these new laws that are coming down.
Okay, thank you very much. Jim, you're up next.
Yeah, so as a member of the Planning Commission, I have had the opportunity to be involved in the city's response to a lot of these state mandates, and I have consistently opposed anything that would erode our local control of development. All of it is very critical in order to make sure that we are able to maintain views, maintain people's privacy, maintain the character of our neighborhoods, and just maintain the lifestyle that people chose when they decided to live in Palos Verdes estates. I think that our response needs to continue to be to express both as a council and in partnership with similar cities, our opposition to this overreach of the state government. I am sympathetic to the calls for dealing with issues of homelessness or housing affordability for folks who are among the most vulnerable, but I don't feel the solutions involve a one-size-fits-all plan, or frankly should impact bedroom communities like ours in the way that the state has tried to mandate. And I would continue to advocate in that direction if I was a member of the city council.
Okay, thank you. Dawn?
I agree with Bill and Jim in terms of the best way for us to fight this is to organize and join in with other cities in order building coalitions to have a larger voice. Part of my concerns, there's a couple things, but the first thing I want to say is I do not support using our parklands for any kind of housing development, whether it's low income, medium income, or high income housing. I don't support that. And when I moved here for the parklands. That was a big part of our choice here. A couple of problems with some of the legislation that's going on right now. One is that a recent study came out stating that the reports or the institution that came up with the housing needs assessment overestimated the number of houses needed because there was double counting and they were using some incorrect assumptions. So, and that the greater burden ended up being in Southern California. So some of these estimates around how many houses do we need are suspect. The other problem with it is the study showed that even though there is supposed to be a concentration on developing low-income housing, in essence, the legislation's not doing that. Most of the housing that's being built is done at market rate. So it ends up being a developer's boon. So that's a problem. And the other piece of this is the housing is supposed to be about reducing global warming and commuting times and gases from people being on the roads. PVE is not close to jobs. We're not going to address that issue. I live in Lanada Bay. I had to make a decision to drive that extra 10 minutes just to get to the other side of the hill, and then another 20 to get to the highway. So PVE does not help them achieve their goals.
Okay, thank you very much. Gain, I believe you're up next.
Yes, I think I do agree with almost everyone on this same issue. The homelessness issue, I think, it's a state issue. We really need to collaborate with all the government type programs to address homelessness. I'm not so sure that developing homes, particularly on our parkland, absolutely not. We don't have the services available. Even if we built something not on parkland and made it for the homeless, the cost of doing it and the services involved would be more than our city can bear right now, let alone in the future. I think that we can't afford to get into a big legal battle one more time to go around, another $1 million in legal fees. So clearly we would have to have a collaboratively based effort with other cities, other big cities, not just all the cities on the Hill, to kind of address this overall problem in California, even if it's just in Southern California, of homelessness.
Okay, thank you. So several, in fact, I think maybe all of you on that last question brought up the whole issue of parklands. So let me just, let me focus there briefly in terms of the next question. Depending on who you talk to, there's some fairly significant number of people. I'm getting these wonderful questions from Julio Iglesias. Dude, anyway, this has to do with, I know, right? This has to do with parklands and the encroachment on our parklands. There's some evidence out there that there's been a number of encroachments over the years, which either means that people have used parklands to build out onto, or have blocked parklands by dense foliage or other ways that would actually keep people from them. There have been some citations issued, but there actually has been little or no enforcement. And so I guess my question is, if you were on the city council, what would you do regarding parkland encroachment and protection?
Who's up?
I'm sorry. Jim, I think we start with you.
Sure. I think obviously parkland encroachments need to be addressed. There is, frankly, the city doesn't even have a choice in the matter. The deed restrictions require that they be used for a public recreational purpose, and so to the extent that there are encroachments into parklands, they have to be removed. I'll say of our parklands, I think that they are absolutely worthy being preserved. I also think that they are unfortunately not very well maintained, many of them. And I think that that is something that the next council should take up, because I think it is an important quality of life issue. I think that's it.
Okay, thank you. Dawn?
Okay, so for me, there's two aspects to this. I'm going to start with the encroachments, and then I'm going to pick up on a little bit of what Jim just talked about. You know, historically, it seems that some of the codes and ordinances haven't been consistently enforced. At least that's some of the things I hear from people when I go door to door and talk to them. And, you know, the parklands, they belong to all residents, and much good work has been done by staff. And I know some residents around identifying encroachments, categorizing them, and at a meeting, I believe a council meeting back in maybe March, April timeframe, you know, council gave feedback around starting to prioritize the encroachments. You know, there's a difference between a wall and hardscape or vegetation or something. So that work just needs to be completed, and then it needs to be put into action. And as part of that, there needs to be transparency. Residents have the right to know what encroachments exist and violations are out there, what actions have been taken, and there needs to be a fair appeals process. So council just needs to give a loop back with staff and finalize that and get it into action. One of the things that Jim just talked about was really around the broader question of parklands, and that has to do with our trails and just the parklands in general. And part of what council needs to figure out is, how do we make sure that we're maintaining the other aspects of the parklands, such as the trails, and making them accessible and in good condition for safe usage by the residents, because that's part of our quality of life. It's part of our fitness. It's part of who we are.
Okay, thank you. Gain?
So one of the reasons everyone seems to cite is the reason they moved here is the parklands. And I do know that several members of the Palos Verdes Residents for Responsible Government, I guess I can name them, John Harbison and Reed Schott, spent thousands of hours studying on the maps encroachments in this city, and we owe them a great debt, because they uncovered a lot of things that I'm not sure people did know or didn't know, but all of those encroachments. So once they get encroached on, once the parklands get encroached on, they're not usable for the public, and they were supposed to be for the public. I've attended many, many, many meetings of the Palos Verdes Homes Association. And the lack of enforcement on this issue is really something that needs to be addressed. They don't feel they can enforce it without people having to go to court. And he did end up going to court. So we don't want to go to court again. So I really think we need to address this problem head on, directly, and say, no, not acceptable to encroach on parkland, and to make the trails accessible to the public like they were supposed to be. Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome. Bill?
Yeah, I think the common theme here is that you know, parklands are almost sacred here, because they're for the enjoyment of everybody. And where encroachments exist, they need to be corrected. And I don't know how far we can go in enforcement as far as giving citations or just what we have to do exactly. I think it's something to be looked into, but we need to get tough. I think we need to have fines that increase with time if you don't make a correction to your parkland encroachment. And I think enforcement is really the answer, and it seems everyone's pretty much agreed on that.
Okay. Next question. And this has to do, again, you've sort of touched on some of this, but let me put the question out there regarding infrastructure. If you take a look at the city right now, and we've had some comments about, you know, the condition of our roads, et cetera, et cetera. From your point of view, what specific infrastructure projects need to receive high priority, and how would you pay for them? And which are ones that you think could in fact be deferred? Okay, and according to my list here. Dawn, you're up next.
Okay, great. You're right, Michael. There's definitely been a reduction in infrastructure maintenance over the years as part of the cost cutting. You know, HR Green did a report. They identified 4 categories of infrastructure. There was safety, regulatory, preventive maintenance, and best practices. And the safety and regulatory categories together represent $6.7 million over 5 years. So that's a little over $1 million a year that currently just doesn't exist in the budget. The report for me is a starting point. I haven't gone in depth into it, but it really needs to be validated by the Public Works Director to make sure that items are correctly classified and that there's data or reports that support the need for the projects and what is truly urgent versus, you know, just something that would be good to do, and are the costs reasonable rather than gross assumptions. So I would support developing a plan for truly urgent needs. For me, that would be something that represents a safety risk or might put us in some kind of regulatory or legal risk based on an assessment from our attorney. But you know, that is just one piece of the plan. As I said earlier, we need to take that into the context of all of the city's needs and then figure out, what do we need? What money do we have? How do we bridge the gap? That would be the way that I would approach it.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Gain?
So about infrastructure, what Dawn is saying about the money, it's 6.7 for safety and regulatory. I was thinking, or came across a report that mentioned $20 million approximately for infrastructure over the next 10 years.
Yeah.
That's a lot of money, actually. And I don't think that even included best practices. So it really would be higher than that. Clearly, safety has to be number one. And we get actually back to liability issues with buildings or with roadways or with other liability issues with fire, maybe, whatever would come up if a building was more fire prone or they earthquake prone, et cetera, those kind of liability issues. In addition to liability issues on our roadways, we are really open to big liability issues there. Malaga Cove did their study in 2017. It was published by PVRRG on 2018 regarding roadway safety. And 70% of the people responding in that survey said that was a big issue for them, roadway safety, that there was lack of enforcement for safety issues on the roadway. So I'm absolutely for number one, safety. But again, we've run out of money. That's a lot of money. We got to get the money someplace. And if we're paying the unfunded pensions or doing some of the things that the pension ad hoc committee might recommend, we then escalated that amount of money and crowded out these other services. Unfortunately, I think infrastructure takes the back burner in terms of the money. We really need to bring it more forward to the front burner. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Bill?
Well, Dawn mentioned the HR Green report, which is the capital improvement plan. I reviewed that. I don't think it's a plan. I agree with Dawn. It's a starting point. We did a project up in San Francisco for the San Francisco airport back before I retired, and we had a similar issue with a lot of infrastructure that needed to be upgraded, needed to be fixed, and we had a limited amount of money. So we wanted to see, well, how exactly do we do it? So we put together a group and we came up with an infrastructure strategic implementation plan. And we sat down with stakeholders. We looked at the list of projects. We defined roles and responsibilities for stakeholders in identifying elements of the plan. And then we prioritized what things needed to be done now. And the majority of those were safety, but not all were safety. Some of the safety things took were down in level 2. But anyway, we put together a plan. you can draw a line and say, all right, these are the things we're going to get accomplished. Everything above the line gets done now because that's the money we have. If you save money, other things can come up above the line. If you run into unforeseen circumstances and you're not efficient enough, things can drop below the line. But I think that's what we need to do, and that will give council also kind of a roadmap for funding and putting together our long-term financial plan.
Okay, Jim?
So as others have mentioned, I think the HR Green study is definitely not a plan. I've watched the Finance Advisory Committee kind of try to wrestle with how to build that into their model. They, as others have mentioned, break it into these three big categories, and I feel very strongly that that the devil is really in the details on that. And I don't know that we can just lump, you know, millions of dollars worth of potential projects into three broad categories and then create a policy around that. So when I've looked through some of the details, I'm sure that HR Green is staffed with people who are well versed in public works projects and what it costs to complete them. But and I'm certainly not an expert in that regard, but there were things in there that I couldn't understand. For example, they had, I think, maybe $300,000 to replace the sewer lateral that serves City Hall. I can't imagine how that is possibly true. And so I would guess that digging into more of the details there, we'd find that there's a lot of projects there that aren't necessary or that are estimated quite a bit higher than they need to be. In general, my response to the HR Green study is that it is an interesting set of data points. It is not a cause for crisis level concern. I think the pension issue is more substantial and deserves more of the council's attention in the near term.
Okay, thank you very much. So I want to point something out, which is, believe it or not, we're at about 9 minutes left before 9 o'clock. So, you know, time flies when you're having fun, with the possible exception of Mr. Iglesias. But beyond that, I want to mention one thing is for those of you who are listening, if you didn't like this or you'd like more, the League of Women Voters is also going to be having a session similar to this, I believe, on October 5th. So this isn't the last time that you would have a chance to listen to the candidates. What I'd like to do now is see if I can combine a couple of things. Each of you have 2.5 minutes to wrap up, and with any luck, we're going to get there pretty close to on time. There was one question that came in that maybe you can put into your closing comments. There's no necessary need to do that, but if you want to, a question came in which said, so all of this we've talked about tonight, but say you get elected, what are the top 3 things that you think in 2021 you've just got to do? Make sense? And the way we're going to do it, just because of the way it fell out, is Dane, you'll go first, and we'll
Okay.
just take it around the circle from there. And I want to again thank all of you very much for your time being here.
So the top 3 issues I think that are near and dear to me to try to help save our city altogether, it would be a collaborative effort, is the budget. I think the insolvency issue is number 1. We can't make any headway with any of the other problems until we solve the money coming in, going out. I think I noticed at number 2 were parklands, which all encompass the encroachments, the lack of enforcements, the views, encompassed many things about what the city really means, the heart and soul of the city. And number 3 is safety, and that actually includes the police, the fire, the traffic. We've all talked about all those problems. So those are the 3 top things that would occupy my mind, I guess, in the first 90 days. Can't solve them in the first 90 days, and as a candidate for city council, I would promise to the residents, if they vote for me, and there's 2 spots, that I would listen to the residents, I would act with integrity, I would be honest, and I would persevere. So I would bring leadership and management to the table, and I hope you'll let me bring that. And thank you very much for listening. Thank you.
Thank you. Bill, you're up next.
Okay, well, I think my top three items, and I'm anticipating this will be everyone's, is financial stability and getting our pension costs down, getting our administrative costs down. I think the second thing is public safety, and that includes the police. Making sure that our department is staffed properly and has the right equipment, the right training to do what they need to do to keep us safe. And the third thing is really looking at the character of the city. And that has to do with neighborhood compatibility. It has to do with parklands. It has to do with all of the things that make our city what it is. As I said in the beginning, most of us have very similar platforms. So I think the decision rests on who has the experience, who's done it before, who has the ability to work together with other members of city council, no matter if your views are close together or far apart, have to bridge the gap and get some things done. So I would ask very seriously that I get the opportunity to become a member of the city council, to work ethically, to work honestly, and bring 50 years of experience to the job. And thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Jim, I think you're up next.
All right, thank you again, Michael, and to the PVRG for inviting me to participate, and to the 76 people who have made it all the way to the end of this. It has been an honor. It's been an honor.
Glutton for punishment, you know? Yeah.
Yes.
Anyway,
It's been an honor to share my goals with you. I'd like to take a quick moment to describe what I believe distinguishes my candidacy. I'm the only candidate for city council with prior experience on a city advisory committee. And if I was elected, I would be the only member of city council with prior experience on the planning commission. I bring with me almost 20 years of management experience in the technology industry, heading groups at various points in my career that have been substantially larger than the size of our city staff. I'm the only non-incumbent candidate endorsed by the Police Officers Association. I'm the only candidate endorsed by 14 Palos Verdes Estates mayors, representing a cross-section of political views and a combined 94 years of city council experience. And I am invested in our community. I have 2 young children growing up here in Palos Verdes Estates. I know how important securing the future is. I believe very strongly that our city's future is my family's future, and it very clearly is my children's future. I believe that on some level, we all expect the same things from government. We expect our leaders to ensure public safety and to preserve the character of our city while remaining fiscally responsible. And we need city council members who will be able to work together. We may not always be able to agree, but we can work towards our common goals with civility and with mutual respect. And so whether you agreed tonight with everything I offered or not, I want you to know that I'm running for city council because I want our city to remain the best place to live. And I think there are a lot more than 3 things we should expect our city council in the coming year to work on, and I'm committed to working on all of them. I'm committed to working together with my colleagues on the council to find the right solutions that allow us to maintain a high level of public safety service, the right solutions to tackle our unfunded pension liability, the right solutions for protecting views and privacy and the character of our neighborhoods. And I'm running for city council to represent the interests of all of our residents. And I pledge that I'll be available to each and every one of you to listen, and that it will take seriously my responsibility to contribute to our shared goal of keeping Palos Verdes Estates the safest and most beautiful place in California. So thank you very much, and I ask you all humbly for your vote in this important election. Thank you so much.
thanks a lot, Jim. Last but not least, Dawn.
Yes, well, everyone started off with thank yous, so I'm going to end with thank yous. So thank you, PVRG, for creating this opportunity for candidates and residents to come together. Thank you to all the residents who attended live or are going to review this after the fact. one of the great features of our city is residents who are passionate and want to get involved. So thank you for being engaged and listening to what each candidate has to offer. And then thank you to each of the candidates who showed up for this important discourse, because I appreciate that we all want to make our city a better place. And as Gaines said, we're putting a lot of energy into something that is going to be a volunteer position. Regarding my top three priorities, the first one would be really around finishing or completing the strategic long-term plan. We need to know where we're going, otherwise we're going to get lost, and that really needs to be the cornerstone. And from that, that will lead us into a position to be able to strive for financial stability by completing our operational reviews of departments and our contracts and finding new revenue. And then as part of that, there's creating a sustainable, affordable solution for our police department that will have manageable pension costs and will achieve what our residents and our officers want to achieve. But at the end of the day, we're facing a lot of difficult challenges. This election's about more than the police. It's about how do we deliver the services residents want while living within our means. And so we've got to be responsible stewards of resources. We've got to find revenue. We've got to provide fair and consistent processes and decisions regarding building and tree review disputes and all city activities and enforcement practices. We need to tap into the expertise and willingness of residents who generously volunteer to help when we have a place a call or need their help. We need to keep residents informed. And we need to create a positive work environment for staff by ensuring they're doing meaningful work that align with the city priorities. They're given the tools to work efficiently and grow in their knowledge and skills, and they have a positive work environment and are free from tirades during council sessions, declaring staff are working in a toxic environment and all the good people have left. As I stated earlier, we have 2 positions to fill, and we need to fill them with people who will collaborate and work effectively together. That's what I've spent my career doing. All of us, council residents and staff, need to come to the table and make tough choices and determine the right balance between what services our residents want and what they're willing to pay. We need strong, team-oriented leaders who will do the work, and I'm one of those.
Thank you all very much. I couldn't help but note it is 9:01 p.m., so we are done. I want to thank you all again, and good luck to all of you on the 5th. I'm assuming you'll be at the League of Women Voters event, and that would be great. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you all for participating. Thank you all for hanging in there. And Julio, you got my sympathy, dude. All right, we're out of here. Talk to you later. Bye.